My name is Zoe, and today I'm going to tell you about the day I had a relationship with my husband's best friend. He was a man who teased me a lot, and I ended up not resisting. Stay until the end so you don't miss any details and subscribe to the channel. I'm married to Donald. What more can I say about him? Donald is the kind of man that everyone considers to be a good match. He's an engineer, works for a large technology company, and has a solid career. He's that guy who wakes up at 6 o'clock in the morning every day, drinks the same black coffee, and dedicates himself completely to his work. When we first met, I was in my second year at university, and he, with a much more centered mind, was the kind of person who seemed to have everything under control. I was lost in a whirlwind of dreams, and he seemed to be the foundation I needed. Our courtship was like a modern fairy tale, smooth, with no big surprises. And the wedding? Well, marriage was the natural continuation of that tale. Over time, however, the glow of that story began to fade. Our life today is routine. Donald goes to work and I stay at home. I worked for a few years, but after we got married, I preferred to look after the house, to devote myself to things other than the stress of my old office job. Not that I had many friends or things to do. I found myself in a kind of limbo, with the days dragging by and the feeling that something was missing. That's when Jordan came along. Jordan had always been friends with Donald since college. I'd met him at the beginning of our relationship, but he'd never been someone who'd occupied a larger space in my life, just my husband's friend. At first, he only came over to our house when Donald wanted to watch a soccer match. No big deal. Jordan always sat on the sofa in the living room, beer in one hand and the remote control in the other. I stayed in the corner of the kitchen or in my corner of the sofa, distracted by some reading or with the TV on, but never really engaged in their conversation. It wasn't that I didn't like Jordan. In fact, I'd always found him likable. Gradually, however, something began to change. I'm not sure when, but I started to notice the looks. Jordan started looking at me in a different way, almost out of the blue, but with an intensity that I couldn't ignore. I, who had previously felt comfortable in my sweatshirts and old t-shirts, began to notice the way he was looking at me. They weren't casual glances. It was more like he was analyzing me. And the strangest thing of all was that, as time went by, I began to enjoy it. Sometimes, during the games, when he was distracted, I would get up and go to the kitchen to prepare something for everyone. It was the perfect time for me to wear the tightest linen dress I had, which made him take notice. And I knew Jordan noticed. I wasn't doing it for Donald, who didn't even notice my change of clothes. He was completely absorbed in the game, as usual, but Jordan noticed. I remember once, as I walked past the room, Jordan looked at me so intensely that I almost felt like I was on a stage, being watched by an attentive audience. He raised his eyebrow insinuatingly and gave me a discreet smile, but for some reason it made my heart beat faster. I smiled back, not really knowing what it meant, but the adrenaline was there, growing with every encounter. I felt a kind of inexplicable excitement and, at the same time, a sense of risk, that we were walking a fine line between right and wrong. One Friday evening, Donald was called to a work meeting. Jordan, as usual, showed up to watch the game with us. I was home alone, without many options for distraction, when he arrived. He was wearing a simple t-shirt that showed off his muscular arms, and he had that relaxed smile that I knew came naturally to him, but which always seemed more provocative to me. The game was in full swing, but the attention Jordan was giving me seemed more than just casual. When he laughed at something in the game, his eyes would quickly turn to me and, for a brief moment, the two of us would meet. Our gazes met with an intensity that made me feel as if the world had stopped for a second. He looked away quickly, but I knew he knew what was going on. I could feel the tension in the air, and even though I knew what was happening was wrong, I couldn't help it. "Are you going to watch the game until the end?" Jordan asked with a smile. I was lying on the sofa with my legs crossed, distracted by the TV screen. "Yes, I will. But you know how Donald gets when he gets carried away with these games," I replied, laughing softly. Jordan moved a little closer. He sat down next to me, in a relaxed way. But there was something different about the way he was positioning himself. It was as if his proximity affected me differently. I didn't know how to react, so I just kept my eyes on the TV screen. "I don't care about Donald," he said, his voice lower now, as if it were a secret. I looked at him quickly, trying to understand what he meant. "And you? What do you want, Zoe?" I swallowed. What did he mean by that? I, who had always been so controlled, so cautious, now felt a whirlwind inside me. It was a mixture of excitement and fear, a good fear, an adrenaline rush that coursed through my veins, making me dizzy. That question kept echoing in my mind for a while, and I knew that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. But at that moment, the game was still on. Donald still hadn't returned, and I only knew one thing. Something had changed between Jordan and me, and I didn't know if I was willing to go back. That night was different from all the others. I could feel the difference in the air before Donald even left the house. The rain began to fall heavily, almost as if the weather was setting the stage for something I could no longer control. Donald had to leave for a business meeting, something that was nothing new, and, as usual, he said he didn't know what time he'd be back. For some reason, I felt relieved at his absence, even though I knew I was about to take a step into dangerous territory. Jordan showed up soon after. He had always enjoyed watching the games with Donald, but that night the situation seemed different. He was looser, more relaxed, perhaps because of the atmosphere or the growing intimacy between us, something I could no longer deny. When he came in, he took off his wet jacket and settled down on the sofa, smiling as if he were at home. I was in the kitchen, organizing some things. But when he came in, I found myself looking at him differently, perhaps more attentively, as if waiting for something. "Is everything all right here?" he asked in a soft voice as he settled down. I shrugged and smiled, trying to keep up appearances. Yeah, just a bit of a mess, but no big deal." He smiled, that smile that always had something defiant about it, as if he knew what was going on inside me but wasn't going to say anything about it. I left the kitchen and walked into the living room with a different feeling. Jordan was staring at the TV screen, but I knew his attention was on me. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting mine, and there was no need for words. The tension between us already spoke for itself. We were talking when he leaned forward a little, without taking his eyes off me. I felt my body tense up, as if his words had a deeper meaning. We were hiding behind a curtain of smiles, casual conversations, and passive moments. But I already knew that there was something there that could no longer be ignored. The game was still on TV, but I couldn't pay attention anymore. My mind was full of conflicting thoughts. Something inside me wanted to move on, wanted to break the rules, while another part tried, uselessly, to remind me of who I was. I got up to get a drink from the kitchen, perhaps in the hope of dispelling the feeling that something was about to happen. When I came back, Jordan was closer, as if he had moved without me noticing. He was so close that I could feel his presence in every inch of the room. His eyes were fixed on me, and I couldn't look at the TV anymore. We were in an enclosed space, where the sound of the rain seemed to mix with the rapid beating of my heart. I stopped in front of him, feeling my body tense at the closeness. We didn't know what to do. There was no disguising the tension between us. He looked at my hands, which were shaking slightly as I held the glass. "You look nervous," he said, his voice soft and full of a curiosity he couldn't hide. His eyes moved to mine, more penetrating than before. "Is everything all right, Zoe?" The question made me swallow. I didn't know if everything was all right anymore. What I did know was that something had changed between us, something I couldn't control. I was in a game with him, and although I tried to resist, it was as if I was being pulled into something that I knew could destroy me, or perhaps set me free. "I don't know," I replied, unable to hide the confusion in my voice. The truth was that I was more than nervous. I was starting to feel something stronger, something I shouldn't be feeling. I looked at him and realized that he already knew this. He knew I was in an internal dilemma, and that seemed to excite the situation even more. He got up from the sofa and took a step towards me. I knew he wasn't expecting a clear answer, and, in a way, he wasn't looking for explanations either. What he wanted, I still didn't know. What I wanted, however, was starting to become all too clear. Jordan stopped a few centimeters away from me. I could feel the warmth of his body, the soft smell of his cologne mixed with the rain that was still falling outside. He didn't say anything for a moment, but his hands were touching my arm lightly, as if he wanted to feel the answer before the words even came out. I was almost out of breath, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do, but when our eyes met again, a part of me knew without a doubt what was about to happen. "Zoe, do you know what you're doing?" His voice was lower now, almost a whisper. It was a question, but also a statement. I looked at him, and adrenaline shot through my veins. There was no turning back. There was no more room for regrets or doubts. I knew exactly what I was doing. Jordan was there, in front of me. I could feel his presence, the way he watched me, as if he knew what was going on inside me. I had never felt so vulnerable, but at the same time, it was as if a part of me was awakening to something new, something forbidden. I had tried to convince myself that I was just being friends, that the glances and smiles we exchanged meant nothing. But now, there was no denying it. The attraction between us was more than evident, and what had once seemed like curiosity had turned into a silent need, something I could no longer ignore. "Zoe." Jordan's voice was soft, but the way he said my name made my heart beat faster. He was studying me, as if he knew exactly what I was feeling, but somehow he didn't say what he expected me to do. There were no words, just a growing tension that filled the space between us. I took a step back, trying to regain control of my thoughts, but at the same time, I didn't want to pull away. Something in me wanted more. Something in me was curious, eager to explore this new territory. "You have to admit," Jordan said with a smile that was both mischievous and comforting, "you feel it too. You feel that connection between us. Subscribe to the channel and leave your likes. The ending is chilling. Don't miss a single detail." I looked at him, my heart racing. He was right. I felt it, but I couldn't put it into words. All I knew was that, as he got closer, fear and excitement intertwined in a way I'd never experienced before. It was like standing on the edge of an abyss, with the feeling that any false step could take me to a place from which I could never return. I took a deep breath, trying to think of what to do. What did I really want? That's what I feared the most. I wasn't ready to face it, to name this growing feeling. I knew that my life would be transformed in an irreversible way, but at the same time, a part of me couldn't resist what was happening. Jordan moved closer, his gaze fixed on mine, but in a way that wasn't invasive. He seemed to understand that I was hesitating, that there was a part of me that was still trying to hold on to the reins. "I'm not going to force anything, Zoe. I just want you to know that, if you want to, there's nothing wrong with that. We can have a relationship even if your husband doesn't know about it. He's told me that the marriage is a bit bad, but it's because he doesn't know how to deal with a woman properly. You can rest assured that this will be our secret." His words were like a balm, at once comforting and challenging. He gave me room to breathe, but the tension between us didn't disappear. I knew that the decision was in my hands. Control, which I believed I had lost, had never really been out of my hands. I had the power to say no, but the will to go ahead was stronger. I stared at Jordan for a long moment. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I was about to do something that would change everything. Before I could process everything I was feeling, Jordan took a step towards me, his gaze still soft, but now charged with something else, something I could no longer deny. He put his hand on my shoulder, as if to anchor me in that moment of uncertainty. "I'm not going to pressure you, Zoe," he said once again, but this time his voice had a tone of sincerity that made me drop my guard. I looked into his eyes and saw something there, something I didn't want to ignore. Jordan didn't say another word. He just took a step towards me, and before I could fully process what was happening, he touched my face with the gentleness of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. and then the kiss. It was as if he had become the meeting point between everything I had repressed until that moment and everything I wanted to explore. His lips touched mine like a silent passion, but at the same time full of delicacy. I felt overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions, and for a moment, all I knew was that I wanted more. The sensation was like a fire, starting gently and growing until it turned into something uncontrollable. I gave myself over to the kiss, without reservation, without trying to rationalize what was happening. Jordan pulled me closer, his arms around my waist, bringing me closer to him, as if he wanted to absorb every part of me. When we separated, the air between us was charged. My eyes were fixed on his, and I saw something there that I couldn't define, something that disarmed me. He was so close, so sure of himself, and I, on the other hand, felt fragile, vulnerable, but in a new way. Something in me wanted more from that moment, wanted to continue exploring this connection, this attraction that seemed to grow with every second. "I knew you felt it," Jordan murmured, almost as if he was satisfied with his discovery. But at the same time, there was something else in his voice, a doubt, perhaps, or just an expectation of what would come next. I didn't know what to say. There were no words to describe what was going on inside me. I felt torn between what I wanted and what I knew was right. But at that moment, nothing seemed to matter. There was only the now, and the now was charged with something I could no longer control. Jordan noticed my hesitation, and once again, the softness in his gesture surprised me, as if he were asking me for permission to go further. His eyes were fixed on mine, and I knew he didn't want to force anything. He wanted me to decide. "Zoe, you don't have to do anything you don't want to," he said in a calm voice, but with a firmness that made me understand that he respected my limits. But at the same time, there was something in his eyes, a need, an unspoken promise, that disarmed me. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control of my thoughts, but what I was feeling had already overtaken any attempt to rationalize. What I wanted now couldn't be explained. It was a need, an attraction that could no longer be ignored. "I want to," I said at last, my voice lower than I had intended. But the words were coming out as if they were being spoken by someone else. There was no more room for indecision. I was here with Jordan, and I knew what I wanted, even if I didn't know how it would affect my life. Jordan looked at me for a moment, as if absorbing every word, and then, without saying another word, he kissed me again. This time, the kiss was deeper, more intense, as if he was responding to what I had just said. He pulled me closer, his hands exploring my arms, my waist, as if he was making sure that I was there with him, that this wasn't an illusion. I let the feeling take hold of me, and at the same time, a part of me was trying to push away the thoughts that arose, trying not to remember that I was betraying my trust, Donald's trust. But that part of me was small now. The need I felt for Jordan was much greater. The moment seemed to expand, growing in intensity, and I knew I was completely surrendered to it. "Zoe, are you sure?" Jordan asked again, his voice deeper, as if checking that I was still with him in this decision. He was being careful, respecting what I was feeling, but he was also allowing himself to move forward, knowing that, at that moment, there was no turning back. I just nodded, my breathing heavier now, as if there weren't enough words to describe what I was experiencing. I didn't need anything else. I didn't need explanations, justifications. I just wanted to live in the now, to feel what was consuming me. And in doing so, I knew I was changing everything. My life, my relationship with Donald. Everything. And so we surrendered to the moment. The connection between us deepened, as if we were two bodies that had already met in another place, in another time. I didn't think about anything anymore. I didn't think about the consequences. There was only the now, the touch, the kiss, the silent promise that was being made with each passing second. And since then, Jordan has been my refuge. Whenever my marriage is bad, I give myself to him, and everything always gets better. With him by my side, everything is different. He has become my escape valve. What would you do if you were in my husband's friend's shoes? Would you do what Jordan did to me? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.